We're going to be talking about Express middleware, and to do that, let's go ahead and get an Express project up and running. I've got a folder for us already. That's awesome. How do we initialize a project in this stack? Does anyone remember? npm init, and I'll do this -y so we don't have to answer some questions. That's nice. All right, we are doing Express middleware, so what might I want to do at this point? Install Express. Cool. Express. I'm also going to install EJS at the same time because we may want that for the views, right? So we can do this at one time if you just space out your dependencies like that. Not bad, right? Now let's create a file for our application, server.js. And what do I need to do inside here? Acquire Express. Yeah, we need that, right? Oh man, come on now. There we go. Yay. Another arrival. Welcome.
So glad to be here.
Yeah, nice of you to be here. Okay, cool. And then what do we need to create now that we have Express required? What's that? Yeah, so let's create our application. So we'll say const app, the result of invoking Express, and then, so at the bare minimum, I need to do what down at the bottom? So we haven't done any routes or anything, but what do I have to do at the bottom of this file? Is that big enough? So I'm talking about though at the very bottom of the file. So let's say, so we haven't even done any routes or anything like that at all. But what will we have to do to get this app to run? Got to listen, right? Yeah, exactly. So let's just pick a port here. I'll say 3300. Okay, good deal. So we were talking about dealing with some static files and also potentially setting up our view engine, right? So how do we set up our view engine? Hannah, how do you set up our views? Doesn't have her nodes? Alright.
Nodes.
That's okay. You get a little help.
I forgot.
Ivan. Not help from there.
Yeah.
Tom.
You can set the, you can do app.set.
Okay.
And make it to set to view engine.
View engine. EJS. Okay. And then what else do we need to set here? Where the views are going to be, right? Okay. So let's say app.set views, and then we'll just create a folder for that. So how do I get the path to this folder? So let's say the folder is just going to be here in the same level in the project directory. So let's use that dunder name, and then I'm just going to append to that /views. Okay. So let's make sure that we have this over here. Create the folder. Very good. Now what else do we want to have here? So we've got our views directory. We probably want to have at least one route, right? Maybe we'll set up an index route, something like that. How do we set up an index route, Brian? Okay. Okay. So yeah, we got this / here saying this is our route, and then the .get is saying what? So we're listening specifically for GET requests here, right? And then what is the second argument we're going to pass to this GET function? Okay. What's that called? Yeah.
Callback.
It's going to be a callback. Exactly. And then the callback would take, as you said, a rec and a res. Does anyone have any issues with me using this style of function, an arrow function? Is that cool with you guys? All right, cool. We'll get used to it too if you haven't seen it much yet. We'll use it a little bit more and it'll become more comfortable. All right, cool. So inside that function, what do I want to do? Render. Yeah, let's render some kind of a template, right? Let's just say that we're going to render the index, which we haven't created yet. I can even shorten this further, so if I don't want to have these curly braces here, since we're only doing one thing inside this function, I could turn it into a one-liner. So I can eliminate these curly braces here and go like that. It'll look a little better when I go like this. So if you use an arrow function and it only has one line like this, you can forego the curly braces. So it's kind of a nice little syntax, right? Okay, very good. Let's create this index file so that we at least have something to render, right? We'll come in here and we'll just say index.ejs. I'll drop in some boilerplate, and then we'll say express middleware. Cool. Are we pretty much ready to run this guy? Pretty much, right? We create our application, we set all our views logic here, and then we just set up an index route. All right, let's try running it. So come in here, nodemon server.js, and then let's go to our browser, load this guy, express middleware. We're online, up and running. Cool. So what I thought would be kind of fun would be to create our own version. You know how we used yesterday express.static so that we could find static files and just serve them up to the client very easily? What if we could kind of build out that functionality on our own without using express.static? That'd be kind of cool, right? So let's try to do it. What we're going to do is up above our main route here, we're going to create what's called a middleware function. And can anyone tell me what they think middleware might be in the case of Express? Connor, what do you think middleware is?
It's something. It's like you already have like functions in Express, but middleware makes it easier to use it. So they're like extensions.
Extensions.
Is it functions that override existing functions?
Think of it as something that sort of resides in the middle between the request and the response. So it's something that's going to have access to both the request and the response, and we can run some logic inside it. Okay. So what if I wanted to just run some logic on every request, and then I wanted to just sort of pass the buck on down to the next route handler? Okay. So maybe I might have some middleware that would just check to see, do we have an authenticated user or something like that? That could be something that you could use middleware for. And then if we don't, we might either reroute them or we might send back some kind of an error code, something like that, right? That would be one example of how we could use middleware. The middleware that we're going to write today is simply going to go check inside of our static directory and see, do we have a file that matches the path that this person has hit on the application? If we do, let's just give that file back, right? We don't need to do anything else with this request and response cycle. We're done right there. So let's write that. In the signature, when we're writing middleware functions in Express, is going to look like this. So remember how we did app.use for express.static? So that means that for every request that runs through our application, we're going to run whatever callback we pass in there, right? the callback is going to take not only the request and the response, it's also going to take this other function called next. What's that?
You mean parameter? You said function. Unless it's called.
No, this actually is a function.
Oh, that's a function.
Yeah.
It's all that.
Yeah, so so what's going to happen is we're going to do our logic inside here, inside the body of the function, and then depending on how that logic goes, we may decide to call next. And what next does is it says, okay, we're done inside this piece of middleware, let's move on to the next handler that we have down the road. Okay? So if we call next, we're going to end up inside this handler right here. Okay? Now, if this handler doesn't match whatever the path was, what are we going to get at that point? Yeah, remember what we got yesterday? It would say something like cannot get whatever the name of the path was. All right. So in order for us to determine if there is a file in our static directory, which we haven't yet created, what was that module that we were using the other day to read files? Does anybody remember?
File system.
Exactly, it's the FS module. So let's require that guy, FS. And what we're going to do is we're going to check the path of the request, and then we're going to basically append that to the end of our static directory and see, does this same path exist in our static directory as a file? And if it does, let's give it back, right? So let's create our static directory. And inside here, let's just create a simple file. Maybe it'll be a style.css file. Oh, what am I doing? Body, background, blue. Okay, and then back here in our server.js, what we're going to do is we're going to try to find the file according to the path. So let's just set a variable here. We'll say const path equals the current directory that we're in plus static, and then I'm going to add on to it the actual path of the request. Okay, so if somebody is requesting /index.html or something like that, we would then go where? We would go to the directory that we were in, then we would go inside the static folder, and then we would go /index.html, and let's see if that file exists, right? Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to say fs.read file, and then we're going to pass in this path right here. You guys remember what the second argument of reading the file was? It's kind of telling us right here. It's going to be a callback function. And then that callback function will take an error and data. Okay, so if we have an error, we're going to know that file doesn't exist, right? So what do you guys think we'll do if that file doesn't exist? Any ideas? You're just gonna like throw an error back to the client or something?
Yeah.
Bad request.
You done?
Yeah, you dummy. Yeah, that was kind of fun. So let's get this callback function started. The first argument again is error, and then the second one would be the data. Okay. So if I have an error, what that means is that the file didn't exist, and what I'm going to do at that point is I'm going to call this next function. And that's just going to kick the can down the road to the very next handler in the line, right? So again, according to the way that we have things set up here, if I call next from inside here, I'm going to get down into this callback, right? It's going to invoke the next callback that I have, which is the index route. So if that doesn't match, again, we'll ultimately get some kind of a 404 response, right? Okay, so let's check to see if error, then what do we want to do? We want to return an invocation of next. And that means we're done inside this particular piece of middleware. If we get past here, then what does that mean? So if I get into line 14 of this code, what did we determine for sure?
It exists.
We know for sure that file exists, right? So what I can do at that point is I can just send it back by saying res.send file, and then I could just provide the path of the file that I want to send back. Okay?
Is that similar to a promise, the res or resolve?
No. No, not related at all. So this is, res is standing for response here. Yeah. Okay, cool. So since we're not really using data, I'm just going to underscore that guy. Okay, cool. So we've got this file in here. Let's see if we can actually serve it up. So we should have refreshed. Let's make sure everything is restarting. We're good there. Let's just go to style.css. Okay, cool. So we're getting the file. If we want to link that inside our index.ejs, we can do that as well. So let's go up here, and then it'll just be style.css. Hey, hey, the more the merrier.
It's not static.
What's that?
Not static stuff.
No, because what we were doing is we were looking basically just the very start of the path, right? And the very start of the path is just style.css, and then we're tacking on our dir name and our static to whatever that path was. Okay. Any questions about this before we keep chugging away? Any bewildered looks, confusion? Okay, so let's reiterate real quick. What does the next function do? Anyone want to volunteer that?
If there's an error, it's going to run to the next available.
So on a more general level, what does this next function do for us?
It runs, I don't know.
After requesting response, it goes to the next.
It basically calls the next handler that we have, either the next piece of middleware or the next route handler, whatever's next in line. Okay. So if this doesn't work out for us, if we don't find that file, we're going to end up down here. It's going to check this and see, does it match this path? And if it does match this path, then of course we're going to invoke that callback function. Right? Very good. So ultimately, if I get down here and we were kind of talking about, what if we hit a situation where nothing matched? So we didn't have a static file that worked. We also didn't have an index route. Well, normally Express would just give us kind of that little cannot get page or whatever. That's not so great. What if we want to create our own 404 page? How could we do that? We could do it like this. We could say app.all, and what this means is that for all different types of requests, so it would handle get, post, put, delete, any kind of request, and then inside that I can pass a wildcard asterisk here, just saying that no matter what the path is, let's invoke this callback here. So let's just do rec res, and then we'll res.render some 404 page that we're going to make. Okay, so if I come in here, just make another view real quick. 404 page. Let's just say h1 find a different route. All right. So let's try some route that we know doesn't exist. I think we were doing funky yesterday. Okay. So we can create our own little catch-all route handler, and this will actually become useful once we get to the Angular section. But for now, I just kind of wanted to show you guys if somebody enters in a path that's incorrect, you can obviously render a custom 404 page if you wanted to. All right. Do you guys want to dive into session a little bit, or check out session? Oh, man. Yeah, that'd be kind of cool, right? So let's do that. So let's look up express session here on npm JS. Talk about it. So we're going to introduce a new dependency that we need to install, right? What express session allows us to do is it allows us to use this concept of session with express. You guys remember what session is? You can tell me. Okay. Say the first part of that one more time. I missed the first part.
You can store information cookies to be used in other parts of your website.
Yeah, so a lot of times actually the information itself is not going to be stored in the cookie. But what the cookie does is identifies that specific user to the server itself, so that the server is storing this information somewhere, whether it be in a database or in temporary memory, and then it can identify this is this specific user, and therefore it can go grab the information that we were storing about that user, right? Okay, so that's kind of how session works. Once we install it here, they give you kind of an example of how you want to set it up. So we're going to use this middleware pattern again, right? We're going to say app.use, and then inside there we're going to invoke session and then pass an options object. Okay. So let's just grab. What the heck just happened? Let's just grab this here as an example, and then go back to our code. We want to install this dependency, so what do I need to do here? Wake up, people. npm install. Yeah. Must have -y. Why? Why do we want to do that? -y. So -y we're only using on the npm init just to kind of get past all those initial questions. We don't need to do it for individual dependency installations. All right, cool. Yeah, you did a good job. All right, so let's close out some of these files. Back inside of our server here, we want to call app.use, like we did here. Okay, and you can see that we've got this little secret keyboard cat. You can make that whatever you want. And then we've got some different options here. Resave false, save uninitialized true. So I believe what the save uninitialized means that if we go through a whole request response cycle and we didn't save anything to the session for this particular user, do we want to hang on to the session? Okay. Because if we haven't saved anything, we may just want to trash the session because it wasn't in use at that point, right? Okay. The cookie has some different options as well. Secure was saying true in this case. I think I'm just going to comment this out for now because you really don't want to set this to secure unless your application is using HTTPS, which we're not. Okay. All right, so we've got these options here. And we probably need to figure out some way to set something in the session. So you guys want to like set up a form on the page? Sounds about right, right? So let's go to our main index page here, and let's just create a little form. All right. Oh. group. We'll say name. All right, cool. Submit button, very good. Where do we want our action to be? No, that's not the method, right? All right, so our action, maybe we'll just send it to process name method host. Okay, so now I'm going to have to create another route that would actually handle this. Let's make sure this is rendering. So if we go back to our index, whew, that's pretty sweet.
When we start doing like incorporating the like post methods and things like that, should we be that's what
It's definitely recommended. Yeah, if at all possible. So notice how we've got this error here. What's not defined? Session. Ah, okay. Made kind of an amateur mistake here, right? Do we have so session's not available to us at all, right? So what do I need to do here? Require it. All right. So we'll say rec session express session. Save it again, and let's check our. Cool. So we reloaded. Now let's get this page going. I've got this form that's going to take in a name. Now we also need to handle that form submission, right? So what else am I gonna do here inside server.js? Yeah, exactly. So let's create app.post process name. And then again, I'm going to have my request and my response available. Cool. All right. Now let's see if we're actually getting something back. Do you guys know where I'm going to be looking for my form data? Yeah, well, it will be the name, but what's it going to be available on? How do I get to it from this? So inside my callback, the only things that I have reference to right now are the request and the response, right? So how do I get to the form data? Rec.body, right? Rec.body. All right, and then here what we're going to do is we'll just, I'm going to redirect after this. So we'll just go right back to the index route, right? All right, so I'm just going to say this is the body. And then here, let's go ahead and submit this form. So we'll say Bob and see what happened here. Uh-oh, the body's undefined. So what do I need to do here? Does anyone know? This is an existential crisis. What's that? Uh-oh, well, think about this. If I do rec.body is already undefined. So if I say rec.body.name, now we're going to have an actual error, right? Because we're trying to call some property on something that's undefined. All right.
You have to set a reference to it and then put it in there?
You. I know somebody's gotten to this section already, so. What?
All right. I think you can set it equal to the section.
Yeah,
Request of section, dot name.
No.
Will be on the form, and then equal to request of function.
All right, that's okay. So the only one who's gotten there, I think, has forgotten. So that's okay. Facepalm. All right, so we have to actually add another piece of middleware to get the rec.body. Okay. So up here where we were doing our app.uses, let's do another one. Where we say app.use. And then Express has this URL encoded, right? This is a function that allows us to retrieve URL encoded form data. So what it's going to do is that once I add this little piece of middleware up here, it's going to make that form data available to us in that callback function the way that we wanted it to. And I think we need to pass this extended equals false, or set to false if I remember correctly. Alright, so let's open up our terminal one more time, and let's do this once more. Cool. Let's go there. Okay, so now this is a little bit better. This is the body, and we actually have this object in there that has the key value pair that we were expecting, right? Okay, cool. So what do we want to do with this now that we have this available? Maybe set it in the session? Does that sound good? All right, so let's do something like rec.session.name equals rec.body.name. Okay? And then when we redirect back to the index route, let's just go ahead and fill that in the in that input. So it'll kind of be pre-populated. If they said their name was Bob before, let's pre-populate the form with Bob. Okay, cool. So how do I do that now? Inside my index right now, I was rendering with no context. What do I want to pass into that this time? So let's pass in name, right? And then for the name, where am I getting that from? Rec.session.name. Okay, and then inside my template, I just need to make a small change here. So I'm going to set a value. And then how am I going to output the name that I just passed to the template?
Bracket.
Not curly bracket. Remember, this is not Python.
Less
Right now.
than.
Yeah, it's going to be this little bracket looking thing. What do we call that? A left bracket? I don't know. Less than, all right.
Less than.
All right, and I need this equal sign, right, to say that I'm actually outputting this to the template. Okay, so we'll just say name, and then here we'll go like that to close it out. Okay, so what happens when I render it initially? So what happened? Did anyone catch that?
It's not the very
Uh-oh. Yeah, I just put a little underscore in there because we weren't using it at the time, right? So let's fix that. Let's go back there. Okay, cool. So our name initially was nothing because we haven't yet submitted the form. I don't know if anyone even saw that, but I submitted it, and then we redirected, and it's like, Bob's there now, right? Okay, so if I refresh the page, we would expect that to still be there, right? Because I have an existing session. Yeah, I refreshed it, it didn't go anywhere. Okay. All right. Yeah, Bob Morley. I've never heard that one before. Brand new. Cool. So that's pretty much it. We got a little light introduction to session here and basically how this middleware works, because obviously we're using middleware quite a bit here, right? Every time we do app.use, that means that we're invoking some kind of middleware function. Okay? And when the request comes through our application, it's going to go through all of this until it gets a route handler that finally terminates the request response cycle. So in the case of when we created our middleware to look for static files, if we found the static file we wanted, we ended the request right there. Otherwise, we would move on to the other handlers and see if they matched. Right? Cool. Let's have some thumbs on this.
Let's
Alright. I saw some sideways on that, Anthony. If you got clarifications, let's talk about it.
But I'm still pretty far behind. But anytime you run a request, it's always going to run through the use. Do responses run through the use also, or just a request?
Yeah, so every request that comes through our application is going to hit these guys because notice on our app.use, we didn't specify any specific kind of path, right? That means that every request is going to match this.
Okay.
Now, if I specified a path of /users and I made a request that did not have that path on it, then it would skip over that app.use. So in this case, since we're not providing a path in the beginning, that means it will match any request that comes through our application.
What if the request has something that cannot go into some of those handlers?
You mean if it has a path? What do you mean cannot go into? Why wouldn't it be able to go into? Because if we're saying .use, that means we're going to use it for all requests unless we specify some path to start.
Like if you were to put parameters, do they have to be met if you're on a page that doesn't have parameters?
To match these guys?
Yeah, I guess.
No, these would match everything. Just because we're not specifying any kind of prefix path that needs to be matched there. Okay, so they'll always be invoked for these requests. Now, the order does matter, however, so if I put this app.use down underneath something, what's going to happen then? So if I move this down below my index route, right here, what do you guys think is going to happen now? Any guesses? So what I'm trying to kind of get across here is that order does matter. What do you think is going to happen now if I'm trying to access rec.session inside this callback function, but I haven't yet used it, right? I haven't passed through this thing that's basically attaching session to the request object. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it should say something like name does not exist on, what is this? Rec.session is undefined, right? All right, so let's open up our terminal. Let's try it one more time. If we go here, can't read property name of undefined, just as we predicted, right? So rec.session is now undefined because we terminated our response right here before we even got to use our session, right? So this is something that you guys may come across during this stack is something's not in the right order and you come across errors, or things don't behave the way that you expect they will.
Okay.
And it may have to do with your route ordering. Okay? All right, cool. So let's dismiss and hop to work here. Happy Friday to the skeleton crew.